All right, Shalom family, you're locked in with Hebrew Elevation Church. All praise to the Most High Yahuwah. My name is only begotten Son Yeshua. Hallelujah. So today we're going to be proving that the Middle East was a black land, but the inhabitants, the indigenous inhabitants of modern day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, you name it, even ancient Iraq and Turkey, the indigenous populations of those regions were all black, like me, like the so-called Negroes today. The indigenous inhabitants of the Middle East were black people, thus saith the Holy Bible. So we're going to dive right into the sources today, praise the Most High, just to prove this, ancient black history that we should all know about. And first and foremost, we're just going to address some of the propaganda, the misinformation that is shared on this topic. Exhibit A. So when it comes to, understanding where the different races are originating from the biblical paradigm, a lot of the Christian institutions want to put forward this notion and this idea in the minds of the people. They want to let us believe that you can see where it says Ham right here, the son of Noah Ham. They want you to believe that Ham is, black people, that we all only come from Africa according to the Bible, right? And you see how they put a small little green sliver here for the Middle East, for Canaan. So here they're letting you know that, okay, the Middle East does belong to black indigenous people, namely the Canaanite descendants of Ham, but by and large, they've shaded in Africa in green, and they're trying to convey this idea that the Middle East is not really for black people. But I'll give them this one. They've put it here, right? Usually they won't even do that. And then they give the idea that Shem, the Shemites, the chosen lineage, that they're all from Saudi Arabia, that they were given Saudi Arabia, and that Japheth, the Europeans, they're given the land of Turkey and the land of, Asia and China, so on and so forth. But when we actually scrutinize this with the scripture, as we're going to be going into today, we're going to see a lot of this Middle East area here where it's saying Shem, that was Hamites that land was given to. And even this area here where the Japheth is listed, you're going to see that Hamites were even living there, that this is a Hamite land. But so far, we're just trying to address the propaganda that they try and, position the Bible as saying that black people are only from Africa, and they try and divorce our history from the Middle East. They don't want you to think that the Middle East has anything to do with black history. That's why when we tell people that the Israelites, the Jews of the Bible, were black, they think we're crazy, because they say, hey, black people don't come from the Middle East. But we're going to be showing you today that the Middle East is very much a black land. But you can see here, so even this one is actually pretty good. Actually, it's even putting Ham in, Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. And this is what a lot of people don't realize, that Hamites, yeah, they actually are the indigenous of the Middle East. But let's get into the proof anyway. Let's get right into Genesis chapter 10, where we're going to see, clear as day in the text, in the Bible itself, who's who, and understand that the Middle East is a black land. So this is Genesis chapter 10, verse 1. It says, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. So right now we're just getting some understanding of who populated the earth after the flood of Noah. And of course, it was Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who the Bible shows we all descend from. So when we jump down, what we're looking at today is specifically Ham, right? Because, so-called scholars and people in general accept Ham as being a black man, right? So just going down this line of Ham right now, we're going to see, where did these black Hamites inhabit? What lands were given to them? So Genesis 10 and 6 says, and the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan. So let's just go into these regions that Ham possessed. All right. So Ham's first son we can see listed there is Cush. I'm going to go into the Hebrew word for Cush to see what land that is. And Cush in Hebrew is here, comes up as Ethiopia 19 times, and Cush. And the word Cush even means black, right? So we see that Ham had a son called Cush, and the Ethiopians descend from Ham. Now going into Mitzrayim, that is the word for Egypt. We're not going to go through all of them. Phut is the word for Libya. So that's a good one to actually go into. We're going to go into this, because this proves that the ancient North Africans, being the Libyans, right, were black Hamites. But today we've got Arabs living in North Africa. So people like to think, oh, North Africa is an Arab land. It's not black. Black people, they call us sub-Saharans to say we live below the Sahara. But the Bible actually exposes the Asian origin of the Libyans being that of Ham, being black Hamites. You can see right there, it says Foot. So the brother of Mitzrayim, who is Egypt, is Foot. And when we see Foot come up, it comes up as put there. And what does it come up as? What does that word come up as in Jeremiah 46:9? It says Libyans, it says the Ethiopians and the Libyans, grouping the Libyans together with the Ethiopians, because if you can remember before, Ethiopians are Cushites and Libyans are Puttites. And guess what? Put or Libya and Cush, Ethiopia, are brothers. So that means the ancient Libyans, man, they looked just like Ethiopians. But today, when you look at Libya, you don't see black Ethiopian looking people being the main demographic of people represented as being from that region. No, it's an Arab looking people that they're going to call Libyans today. But what we can see from the Bible, the ancient Libyans were black just like the Ethiopians, and so were the ancient Egyptians, because we will go into that word Mitzrayim. And the word Mitzrayim is just the Hebrew way of saying Egypt, as we're going to see right now. The Hebrew meaning for Egypt, Mitzrayim, you can see that comes up in the Bible 586 times as the word Egypt, Mitzrayim only 4 times. And we all know where Egypt is in Africa. So we can see so far that the ancient biblical Egyptians are black people, just like the ancient, Cushites, who are their brothers, and the ancient Libyans are black. But this is the key one we're focusing on today is Canaan. All right, because Canaan is the brother to these black races. So Canaan was a black man as well. And the land of Canaan is very important when you come to the Bible, because this is what the Bible calls the promised land. And what we're learning right now is Canaan, the promised land, yeah, belongs to an ancient black Hamitic race. So, yes, the land of Canaan, the Middle East, was inhabited by black people. It was actually given to Canaan. All right. So let's just get into a verse that shows a bit of the significance of Canaan. So we'll go into Exodus chapter 3, or actually, we'll go to Exodus chapter 6. So check this out, right? So this is Exodus chapter 6, and we are going to read verse, where does it mention Canaan here? Yeah, verse 4, it says, and I have also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan. So it's the land that belongs to Canaan. Canaan is a Hamite, right? So the Middle East, or the land of Israel, originally before God gave it to the Israelites, belonged to these black people, Canaan. So black people are the indigenous people of the Middle East, the Canaanites, descendants of Ham. That is the land of Ham. It says, the land of their pilgrimage, wherein they were strangers. All right, praise the Most High. So now let's go back into understanding who were the indigenous people of the Middle East according to the Bible. So we've just seen that Canaan, yeah, descends from Ham, and this is where the promised land is coming from. Okay. So moving forward into Genesis 10 and verse 7. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look a little bit at some of these maps. So there's another map there. You can see Ham, Shem, Japheth, mainly putting Ham green shaded in Africa. And they don't really want you to focus on the Middle East being a black region, but we're highlighting that today. And yeah, this region is also known as the Levant area. You can look into the word Levant, but that's one term that people use when referring to the Middle East region, talking about this area here. It says here, look, the East, it says Levant from the French lever, to rise, as in sunrise, meaning the East, historically the region along the eastern Mediterranean shores, because we've got the Mediterranean Sea that is bordering the Middle East right there. It says roughly corresponding to modern day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and certain adjacent areas. So what we're proving today is that this area known as the Levant or the Middle East, this is originally inhabited by black Hamite nations. This was a black Hamite inheritance according to the Bible. So Middle East culture, Middle East history, according to the Bible, is black history. So if the archaeologists were really honest when it comes to their excavations of this land, and when they're researching the DNA of the dead people that they find in this land, they'll tell you that, oh, wait, we're finding a lot of black pottery, a lot of art to do with black people in this region, a lot of DNA to do with black people, but they never released this stuff I believe some people have found this information, you know what I'm saying, but they don't put this at the forefront or the mainstream of the representation of the Middle East because they want to portray this narrative right now that this land doesn't belong to black people. But the Bible is testifying otherwise. It's showing us that this is a black Hamitic, nation, just like Africa. So whatever the Africans are looking like, the African Hamites look like, these Middle Eastern Hamites should be looking like as well, which is black. All right. So now let's get into it a bit more. I'm going to read a little bit more of this right now. And oh yeah, so when it comes to, Egypt being the land of Ham as well, because today we see Arabs live in Egypt. Arabs had conquered Egypt in the 7th century. If you look in the history, the Arabs weren't always there. Egypt didn't always look Arab. It used to only be black, right? With some other nations that would come in to do trade and live there. But the Bible even testifies in Psalm 78 and 51, it says, and smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the chief of their strength in the tabernacles of Ham. So it's called in Egypt the tabernacle or dwelling place of Ham. So this was a, place where Ham's descendants lived, namely the children of Mitzrayim, the Egyptians. So just further evidence that the ancient Egyptians, according to the Bible, were black because they descend from Ham. And moving forward, it says, and the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, and Sabata, and Rama, and Sabicha, and the sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. So now let's look at some of these descendants of Cush. These people descend from Cush, who's the forefather of the Ethiopians. Let's see what land inheritance they had. So we can see, wait, does Ham have some inheritance beyond Canaan in the Middle East that we can look at? So let's look into that right now. So we saw Dedan and Sheba and Rama, okay, belonging to Ham. And it's this map is putting Rama in this region right here next to the Persian Gulf, and Sheba and Dedan next to the Persian Gulf, which would make sense because the scripture tells us in the book of Ezekiel 27 that Sheba and Dedan and Rama, that these were merchant nations. So these Hamitic nations, they were very wealthy, rich black nations because they used to engage in maritime trade. Maritime means trading or selling of goods on the ocean in the marine environment. So, of course, their land must border the sea. Now, what I have noticed when it comes to these locations for Dedan and Sheba and Rama, they vary. Some maps put Dedan and Sheba in different areas. So I believe they've not got, complete definite understanding of where exactly Dedan and Sheba were located, okay? Well, they know it was in Arabia. So what we're learning right now is that Hamites populated Arabia, because you can even see right here in the color code of this chart right here for the, different people, it's telling us that the descendants of Ham is coming up in orange. And look, we see orange here. We've got Foot here, Libya in that region. But then we've got Dedan and Sheba and all these other Hamite nations and Hamite names in Arabia, showing us that ancient Arabia was all black as well. Okay. I'm going to compare this with some other maps as well, because you're going to see some other maps put the names in different regions. There's not always a consensus when it comes to biblical maps, because there's not always complete, clear information to let us know exactly where people lived. But for example, look, we've got right here, and you might be wondering before we seen there was multiple Sheba and Dedans. That's because there's different people with that name in the Bible. So look, we've got Dedan and Dedan in these different locations now, and it's saying Sheba's here in modern day Yemen. And we look on this map. Does it say Sheba and Dedan? Nope. This one's saying this whole region here, Dedan and Sheba, but it's all in Saudi Arabia. So what you're learning right now is that clearly the Hamitic people, man, this race that people know were black people, right? Because I'd go as far to say is Noah was black. Shem and Japheth, they were all black as well when they were first born, right? But the thing is, most people will stick to understanding, well, one thing we can all agree on is Ham was definitely black. So what we're focusing on today is the one that we know is definitely black, Ham. He definitely had descendants living in Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and even Mesopotamia. All right, so we're starting to show, just how deep this black history goes, man. That we are the ancient people of the biblical region. The biblical history, Bible history is black history, man. Hamite history and black Israelite history as well. So yeah, we see Sheba down here again, Sheba and Dedan in the areas of Saudi Arabia. So we just can see, we can confirm with this that yeah, Saudi Arabia is most definitely a Hamite indigenous area. It belongs to Black indigenous Hamites, right? These regions bear witness to that, Ramah and Sheba. We're not going to look at all of them just for time's sake, but we got Havilah. You can look at where these locations are yourself. Many of the locations are contested when it comes to like Havilah or Sabata, but Dedan and Sheba, they definitely know, and Ramah, that these areas were in Saudi Arabia, man. So now Genesis 10 and 8, this is a great point. It says, Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth, right? So Nimrod actually comes from Ethiopia. His son, his father was the father of the Ethiopians, Cush. Yeah. And it goes on to say, where did Nimrod live? It says he was a mighty hunter before Yahuwah. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahuwah, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So it's telling us that ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Babylon, was a kingdom founded by a black Cushite, a black son of Cush. All right, because when we look at Babel, we know that that is, the founding of Babylon. This is the word for ancient Babylon. All right, you see, it comes up as Babylon 257 times. So it says Babel there, but it's really just Babylon. So Nimrod founded Babylon. Babylon, this kingdom that was so great in the Bible, which is located here. Let's just get a map for it. Let's get a map for Babylon real quick so you can see this. So, map of biblical ancient Babylon. This place was founded by Nimrod. This area right here, in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, okay, which would be modern day Iraq, and this region over here. So they try and tell us that black people and black history is all from Africa, but the Bible saying us that black people were the founders of ancient Mesopotamia, Samaria, which is actually the first civilization after the flood. Because after the flood, where did Noah and his sons go? The scripture shows us that, in Genesis 11, that, they founded Babylon. They founded Shinar in this plain city. That's where everyone was living. This is even where Abraham was called out of. Okay. When the Most High called Abraham, he lived where we can see here, it says Ur of the Chaldees right here. So yeah, ancient Babylon, kingdom founded by a black Babylonian. Now, it wasn't only Babylonians that was living in ancient Babylon, because we had Abraham living here. He was a descendant of Shem, and we had other people living in that region as well, other Shemites. For example, as we're going to see, Ashur, lived in that region as well. He was the father of the Assyrians, and he established Assyria. But yeah, so far we're just broadening the horizons of Black history and showing that Black history even reaches into Iraq. Black people, we founded ancient Iraq, man. Praise the Most High. When I say we, I'm just saying black outer skin color, even though we're not Hamites, the black people that I normally talk to my audience are Black Israelites, but the descendants of Ham anyway, they founded ancient Iraq. So it says, yeah, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So these are other cities that were part of the kingdom that, Nimrod established. These are all kingdoms in the land of Shinar. Shinar was part of ancient Babylon. Let's actually get a map of Shinar now. Map of Shinar. So here we go. We can see these cities right here. Look, Erech, Babylon, Akkad, Mesopotamia, Babylon land. So this was a black land, praise Yah. Filled with black Shemites, black Hamites, etc. And verse 11 says, out of that land went forth Ashur. Ashur was the father of the Assyrians. He's actually a descendant of Shem, not Ham. And it says, and builded Nineveh and the city Rehoboth and Calneh. So it's saying that, this Shemite, Ashur, he also lived in the kingdom established by Cush, and he left Babylon and he went and built his own city, which was Nineveh. Okay. And, he also built the city of Rehoboth and Calneh. And it says, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calneh, the same as a great city. So this is talking about a Shemite and what he made. He built upon the heels of Nimrod the Cushite. These are the kingdoms that he built. Now, verse 13 says, and Mizraim, so that's the father of the Egyptians, begat Ludim and Anim and Lehabim and Nuphim and Pathrusim and Casluhim, out of whom came Philistim and Caphtorim. So this is powerful. So this is telling us right now that the Philistim, who are known as the Philistines or Palestinians, descend from the Egyptians. So the Palestinians descend from the Egyptians, Mitzrayim, and we know Mitzrayim descends from Ham. So that tells us that the biblical Palestinians were Hamites. They were black, just like the Cushites, just like the Egyptians. And let's just go into that word Philistim so you can understand how we know that this word here means Palestinian. All right. So we go into the Hebrew word for Philistim. It's H64, and it says Philistim equals immigrants and inhabitant of Philistia, descendants of Mizraim, who emigrated from Caphtor/Crete. They believe that Caphtor might mean Crete, to the western seacoast of Canaan. And it says Philistine there. And then when we just scroll down, we'll just see how this word comes up as Philistine. So it says Abimelech, king of Philistines, unto Gera, Philistines over here, Philistines over there. And throughout the Bible, the Israelites always fighting the Philistines. Samson over here, he looked at the woman of the Philistines, it says. And if we go into the etymology of the word Philistines, you're going to see that this is actually the word for Palestinians. It's just changed over the years. So Philistine right here, it says one of the Old Testament people of coastal Palestine who made war on the Israelites, early 14th century, from Old Philistim, from late Philistinus, from late Greek Philisteinoi, from Hebrew Philistim, people of Pelesh, Philistia, compare Akkadian Palestu, Egyptian Plostu. The word probably is the people's name themselves, hence a heathen enemy and unfeeling foe. And I don't think it's showing you where it's evolved to Palestine. So let me see if maybe it shows it here. Look, yeah, Palestine, it says from Latin Palestinian, name of Roman province, from Greek Palestine, Herodotus, from Hebrew Pelesheth, Philistia, land of Philistine, sea, Philistine. So there's the connection there. Originally the Palestinians in Hebrew is called Philistines, and they descend from Mitzrayim, meaning they are Hamites. So now let's get back into this and showing, let me see what we've got over here, Fraser. Okay, so we've already gone through Sheba. Yeah, we've done that already. So yeah. So yeah, we've just shown that the ancient Palestinians, and now let's just get a map of biblical Palestine, right? Map of land of the Philistines. And we're going to show that this region here, according to the Bible, was inhabited by black Hamites that descend from Mitzrayim, son of Ham, Egypt. Okay. And we know them as Philistines or Palestinians today. So you see modern day Palestine, you got Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron. Yeah, it belongs to the Philistines or the Palestinians that come from Egypt or Mitzrayim, which come from Ham. So today you might think, oh no, it's Arabs. The Palestinians are Arabs. And Arabs are not Hamites. You say Arabs are Shemites. No, the Palestinians are not Arab Shemites. The Palestinians are Hamites according to the Bible. Now today they don't look black. You know why? Because this region called the Levant area, yeah, has been conquered by white Europeans many times. We had the Greeks come and conquer this region before Christ, 200 years before Christ. We've had the Romans conquer and live in this region, and they've mixed with the indigenous black populations and displaced many black people. And also with them mixing with the black people here, now these people have become brown skinned. Now the Philistines or the Palestinians, many of them are brown now. The people living in Jordan and these regions are all brown skin a lot of the time now because they mixed over the centuries. But originally, we can see they were black descendants of Ham. And there's even many, there's still black people that live here that haven't mixed, but you're just not going to see them in the media. Okay. So anyway, let's get into this a little bit more. So yeah, moving past Philistine, we've got Genesis 10 and 15. It says, and Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. So this is powerful right now, yeah? So Canaan, we know the son of Ham was Canaan, and he was obviously a black man coming from Ham, and he begat Sidon. So if you've seen that word Sidon in the Bible, right? It's a popular city in the Bible, referenced quite a lot. You're going to understand now that, okay, Sidon comes from who? He comes from Canaan, and Canaan comes from Ham. So the Sidonians in the Bible, the people of Sidon, let me just type this in Sidonians, yeah? They were black people. So let me just get a map of Sidon. Map of Sidon. So you see that right there next to modern day Lebanon, right? Tyre and Sidon. So this was Hamite territory, black Hamite territory. These were all ancient black people that descended from Ham, man. These are all related to Ethiopians, related to Sudanese people, related to black people. Of course, these people were all black originally, man. Okay, and if you read the Bible, you'll see the Sidonians, they're mentioned a lot. They're a black race. Now let's go back to what we just had there with Sidon. Now this is a great one, Heth. So Heth descends from Canaan, and Heth is actually the father of the biblical nation known as the Hittites. Okay, and the Hittites, right? Let's get where Heth is right here. Let me get this in the Hebrew. The Hittites, they lived in the promised land of Canaan, but they also inhabited a lot of Turkey. They had a very strong kingdom in ancient Turkey, showing that ancient Turkey was originally a black land as well. So this is it comes up 14 times in the Old Testament. Heth means terror. It says, a son of Canaan and the progenitor of the Hittites. So he's the forefather of the Hittite nation. And we can see, it says, the sons of Heth over here, and the children of Heth. Let me see. Heth comes up, or the Hittites come up in Deuteronomy chapter 7 as one of the Canaanite nations that the Israelites have to conquer to get the land. It says, when Yahuwah thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and have cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites. So God's going to cast the Hittites out of Canaan, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. So we can see that these Hittites were one of the descendants of Canaan, yeah, the descendants of the Canaanite nation. And yeah, they were living in the promised land, but not only did they live in the land of Israel, in the Levant, but look where else they lived. So we're going into Encyclopedia Britannica, and it says Hittite, member of an Asian Indo-European people. So look how they try and, do a psyop on your brain to make you believe that these Hittite people are tied to Europeans, right? When we can see the Bible shows they're not connected to Europeans. They come from Ham. And I thought Ham was the father of the Africans. So would they not be related to Africans? They'd have the same DNA. The Hittites would have the same DNA as Ham had. They have the same DNA as the Cushites had. They have the same DNA as Ethiopians. But they want to call them Indo-Europeans. But they descend from Ham. But anyway, it says, who appeared in Anatolia at the beginning of the second millennia, right? And check this out. It goes on to say this. So praise the Most High. Let me just make my screen a bit bigger so I can see this. All right, so yeah, it says beginning of the second millennia BCE by 1340 BC. So this is 1000, or it's saying second millennia before Christ, so 2000 years before Christ. Let's see where these black people lived. By 1340 BCE, they had become one of the dominant powers of the Middle East. They don't want you to know that ancient black Hamite nation was a dominant power in the Middle East. They want to divorce the Middle East from black history. When they talk about black history, what they talk about, oh, modern slavery. They don't want to tell you about black people being a dominant power in the Middle East in the time of Moses. This is the time of Moses that they were ruling, right? It says one of the dominant powers of the Middle East. It says probably originating from the area beyond the Black Sea, and we're going to look at a map to see where that is, The Hittites first occupied central Anatolia, making their capital, where is it saying that now? They're making their capital at Hattusa, modern Borgazkoi. Early kings of the Hittite Old Kingdom, such as Hattusilti, reigned in 1650 to 1620 BCE. So they've even got this regency, this kingdom, 1,600 years before Christ. These black people ruling, right? Consolidated and extended Hittite control over much of Anatolia and northern Syria. So now let's see where Anatolia is, because this is a region where they're saying the Hittites was ruling from. Let's learn about that. So look at the land of the Hittites, man. This is modern day Turkey, right? Look at that region right there. Modern day Turkey, they was ruling over that. And it said even parts of Syria. That's why Aleppo is, included in the province of their kingdom. And you see, it mentioned the Black Sea. There's their capital city, Hattusa. So, Turkey's massive as well. So for them to have this control over this massive region, the Hittites, and they even ruled over parts of the Promised Land, because we had to kick them out of the Promised Land, shows that this black nation was very powerful, but they always want to portray black people as weak. And they say we have no history. We couldn't even read or write when they came to take us as slaves from Africa. But the Hittites could read and write. They've got recorded history. And they are a Hamite nation. And they say black people are African Hamites and we couldn't read and write until white people taught us. When did we forget to learn to read and write? We was reading and writing, or black people reading and writing, black Hamites were reading and writing when they was living in Turkey as Hittites, ruling over Turkey. Okay, they're never going to teach you this history, man. And you see Hattusa there, this is dominion of the Hittites. And we're going to type in Anatolia. And look, this even extends the border because they don't know exactly how big the border was. So now they're saying basically the Hittites, they ruled over all of Turkey. In the time of Moses, yeah, they're saying that the Hittites controlled all of Turkey. And we know that according to the Bible, they were also in the Promised Land, one of those 7 Canaanite nations. Here's another one. The Hittites again, ruling in this land in between the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea, which is modern day Turkey, and even in regions or areas of, I think this is Armenia, next to like Babylon and stuff like that. But you see this, right? They research the Hittites, man. They used to have a lot of wars with the Egyptians. They was a mighty nation. Anatolia. So let's learn where Anatolia is. So that's Turkey, Asia Minor, because they keep saying that the Hittites lived in Anatolia. It says Anatolia, also known as Asia Minor, a large peninsula in Western Asia that forms the majority of modern day Turkey. It's a region with a rich history, having been home to many ancient civilizations and empires. Geographically, it's a plateau bordered by the Black Sea to the north and the Mediterranean Sea to the south and the Aegean Sea to the west. Okay. Now let's learn a bit more about these black people, man, of the Asian, as they call it, the Near East. So it says Hittite control over much of Anatolia and northern Syria. Hattulis' grandson Merillisis I raided down to the Euphrates River to Babylon. So these black people, the Hittites, were even, warring against Babylon and taking land, putting an end in 1500 years before Christ to the Amorite dynasty there. So there was Amorites ruling over Babylon, a dynasty, a royal house of Amorites ruling over Babylon. And you know who Amorites descend from? Amorites descend from Canaan as well. So that's even showing us that there was these black Hamite Canaanites, these Amorites that ruled over ancient Iraq. Amorites right here, you see Amorites, like we can see, look, we've got Heth right there, the father of the Hittites we've just been looking at. And it says, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite. So Canaan, one of his sons is the Amorites, and his sons, the Amorites, were fighting against their brothers, the Hittites. And the Amorites, they ruled over ancient Babylon at this point, 1500 before Christ. So 1,500 years before Christ, Black Amorites had a dynasty ruling over ancient Babylon. And we only need to look in the Bible to find all of this out. Okay. Well, obviously we went to extra biblical sources, and it tells us that there was an Amorite kingdom in Babylon. So I guess we can also expand our learning through doing that. But anyway, moving forward, it says to the Amorite dynasty there, after the death of Merillis, and you see, they know all of this because it's written history. So these black people were literate. They had kingdoms, they had dynasties, they had wealth, they had writing, they recorded their history, man. Okay. But anyway, moving forward, a dynastic power struggle ensued with Telepenus finally gaining control about 1530 BC. In a noted edict of Telepenus, long upheld by succeeding generations, he attempted to end lawlessness and to regulate the royal succession. So we're not going to go into that any more detail, but you can read this all for yourself. You can see, look, man, these black Hittites, man. So Turkey's original inhabitants were descendants of Canaanites. They're known as Hittites, sons of Heth. Okay, so even Turkey was a black land. So when they want to tell us, oh, you guys are crazy for saying the Israelites are black and that history in that region belongs to black people, are you crazy? The Bible even tells you that it was all descendants of Ham that ruled from Libya to Egypt to Cush to Canaan to Saudi Arabia with Sheba and Dedan, and we even reigned in Babylon with Nimrod, the son of Cush, being the one that established that kingdom, and then the Amorites ruled over that kingdom as well, who were descendants of Cush, descendants of Canaan, sorry, and the Hittites were ruling over all of Turkey, as you could see. So yes, this is very much a black history that the church is never going to show. You're going to say, oh, it doesn't matter. They're going to say, oh, you don't need to look into this. This is our identity. We need to understand as black people. Black people have done great things, even though we may not be, Hamites. If you are, an Israelite that has gone through the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28, we're not Hamites, yeah. But it's still good as black people to be able to see what black people have accomplished and to know that this land and that history was always a black history. So when you're looking for an Israelite, you're looking for people that, are clearly a black people group because it was always black peoples that inhabited that region of the world from Mesopotamia even down to Egypt, man. Praise Yah. So yeah, let's get into this a little bit more. So now we're looking at it says, and the Jebusite and the Amorites. We're not going to go to Jebusite. Well, we are going to go to Jebusite actually, because Jebusite has a lot of significance when it comes to the land of Jerusalem, because the Jebusites descend from Canaan, and the land of Jerusalem used to be called Jebus because the land of Jerusalem was founded by these black Canaanites known as Jebusites. Because it says here, look, Jebusite, descendants of Jebus, descendants of a third son of Canaan who lived in or around the site of Jebus, the early name for Jerusalem. So even Jerusalem was founded by black Canaanites, but they don't want to tell you that this land originates from black people. So when we're looking at the land of Israel, the archaeologists, if they had some integrity and wanted to give you the truth, they will tell you, oh, we're finding bones of all kinds of black people in the Middle East. They should be finding a bunch of black bones in the Middle East that they're telling you about because the original people that lived there were all black Hamites. But why do they never tell us that in archaeological finds that, oh, we're finding black bones of ancient Jebusites, we're finding black bones of ancient Hittites, black bones and black DNA and black facial structures of ancient Girgasites, Canaanites? Why don't they do that? Because they don't want you to perceive the Middle East as being a black land, because then you'll start questioning, well, how comes it's not black people living there today? How do these people that live there today that are not black, how do they have a history in that land when the Bible and even archaeology testifies to that being an indigenous black land? And by the time the Israelites established their civilization in the Middle East, it was all black back in those days. So how are these people living there today? How could they ever say it's their land when they don't bear the right DNA or even the look, the phenotype of the people that originally lived there? But moving forward, right, and look into these words in your own time. I'm not gonna, unpack everything to do with the Jebusites and all of this because there's a lot of history that I just want to give you some insight on, so you can go away and look at this yourself. All right, go into greater detail and understand that wow, Black history is rich. Okay, because we're not just going into Israelite history today. We're going into Black history, period. Because these, our word, I want to say racist so-called Christians, right? They want to say that we black people, we're just Hamites. We're not no chosen Israelites. So cool, you want to call us Hamites? I'm going to show you how great the Hamites were then, and how the whole Middle East was founded by Hamites, who you even admit are black. All right. So yeah, we've got the Amorites there. We've got the Girgashites, all descendants of Canaan. Okay, and these are the ones that lived in the land of Canaan when the Israelites, when we drove them out. We've got the Hivites, the Archite, and the Sinite. We're not going to go into all of these. So we're going to wrap it up. I've got some other tabs here. I want to see what I brought up with that. So that's Dedan. Over here, we've got Sheba and Dedan, right? We can see that's in Saudi Arabia. Okay, Girgashite over here. You can see and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites. You can see these people are always grouped together. These Hamites are always grouped together and they're not being put in Africa. No, they're being put in the Middle East, in the Levant. The Levant was clearly populated by Hamites, man. The Middle East is a Hamite land. God gave a land that he gave to the Hamites to the Israelites. Okay. So now let's click on this next one. What we got over here? Let's just on that then. Okay, we just gone over that. Let me close that one, the Hittite one. Let me close some of these tabs that we've already gone over. So Anatolia, we went through that. Amorites, here we go. Let's get into some Amorite history, man. Some black Amorite history, because we just seen that the Amorites descend from who do they come from again? I think it was Canaan, right? Amorites come from Canaan. Let me just get that. Yeah. Canaan begat Sidon and the Amorites right there. So check this out, right? These black people, where did these black people live? Were they from Africa? What did they live in Ghana? Were they living in Senegal? Yeah. And look, they said that black people couldn't read or write, but let's see what they found. Cuneiform clay tablets from the Amorite kingdom of Mari, first half of the second millennium BC. So these people could clearly write. They was writing in cuneiform, one of the most ancient scripts, man. So clearly, black people, man. This black people that wrote this. Black Hamites wrote that, bro. Ancient history come, find me some white history, find me some Greek history or something that predates this writing right here. Yeah, I'll wait. So this is Amorites. Yeah, it says the Amorites were an Asian Northwest Semitic speaking Bronze Age people from the Levant. Look how funny that is, right? This statement here alone is racist. Let me tell you why it's racist. Yeah, we just saw that the Amorites were Hamites. They descend from Canaan. But rather than say that these people are a Hamitic people, they say they're a Semitic speaking people because obviously they would have spoke like, the Hebrew language that we speak is a Canaanite language, is a Hamitic language. But they're going to say they're a Semitic speaking people because they would rather make people think that they were Semites or Shemites rather than have people think they're Hamites because people, when they hear the word Ham, Christians think, oh, black. So to stop people from thinking that it's a black people with a black civilization, rather than attribute all of this great history to black people and black skin, they want us to think, oh, Semitic, so that we just dismiss it. But check this out anyway. A Semitic Bronze Age people from the Levant, initially appearing in Sumerian records 2,500 years before Christ. Look at this ancient history, man, written about 2,500 years before Christ. They expanded and ruled most of the Levant. So they ended up conquering most of the Middle East area from Jordan or from Lebanon all the way down to Palestine, right? And it says Mesopotamia and parts of Egypt. So they even ruled over Egypt as well, man, and Mesopotamia. So these black people, man, they had a conquest. We had an empire from the 21st century BC to the late 17th century BC. So before the time of Moses, man. It says the Amorites, and that's about 400 years before the time of Moses, they were in their most powerful. The Amorites established several prominent city-states in various locations, such as Islin, Kurda, Lhasa, Mari, and Elba, and later founded Babylon, the Old Babylonian Empire. So it's saying that they founded the Old Babylonian Empire, right? But we know that it was Nimrod that founded ancient Babylon, but I guess they were, also rulers over that place as well. But it says they also founded the 14th dynasty of Egypt during the fragmented era of a second intermediate period in the Nile Delta, which was characterized by rulers bearing Amorite names such as Yakbim, Sekharri, and were likely part of the later Hyksos. And let's just look at some of the areas that they ruled over. So it says Islin, it's not showing a picture for that. Kurda, so it's showing us a picture of this. Kurda is in Mesopotamia, right? We can see that they was ruling there. Lhasa was also in Mesopotamia, right next to Ur of the Chaldees and Uruk. And there's a lot of history of Uruk. When people want to go and worship all of them Babylonian tablets, man, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, you're looking at this area right here, man. That's where a lot of that history comes from. And we can see these black Amorites, man. This was the region that they ruled over, right? And it says they ruled over Mari as well, it says Mari was an ancient Semitic city-state in modern-day Syria, and they want to call it all Semitic. So you think it's all like Syria belongs to Shem and stuff like that. But no, the Bible is showing us that, Syria belonged to who? It belonged to Sidon, son of Canaan. So this was a Hamitic city state. It's not right to call it a Semitic city state, but they want to divorce Ham from Canaan because they don't want you to think of that place as being black. All right, because these people that are in archaeology, that are in anthropology and the studies of ancient people, they're not unbiased. They're not people that are not racist. They got agendas. The people that are doing all the archaeological digs, they're not just going to tell you, oh, well, everything we're finding here testifies that black people lived here. They don't want to tell the world that because they want to be perceived as powerful as the people that have always been in power. They want to make you think that they're the ones that made everything happen in history. They don't want to tell you that black people are the forefathers of civilization and we had the greatest civilizations and we're the ones that taught them how to write, taught them how to make a kingdom, and taught them everything they know. They don't want to tell you that. They want to tell you that we did nothing. Yeah, they want to obstruct us. They want to keep us ignorant in the dark. All right. It says, and later founded Babylon and the old Babylonian Empire. So yeah, man, we can see that these black Amorites, they was doing a whole lot, bro, but they're not going to tell you about them, right? So you have to research it yourself. And it says with Girgashite, and we're just going to skip forward here. It says, and the Arvite and the Zemarite. You can look into all these people for yourself, man. And the Hamathite, and afterward, where the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. So, man, yo, Ham had a lot of kids, man. Well, he had a few kids, Mizraim, Foot, he had, was it the rest, man, Cush and Canaan, and those kids had all of these other kids, and look how much territory and history, they created, man. All right, praise the Most High. And it says in verse 19, and the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, so like where Jordan is, as thou comest to Gera unto Gaza, because we know the Philistines, children of Mizraim, children of Ham, they lived in Gaza, Palestine, right? As thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah and Adamah and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. These are the sons of Ham after their families, after their tongues. And it says their tongues, man. So they didn't speak no Semitic tongue. They spoke the Hamitic tongue. We Hebrews, we took our language from the Hamites. The Hebrew language came from Hamites. You know what I'm saying? All right. So, and when they try and say, oh, it's a Semitic language and stuff like that, well, today we call it a Semitic language, but really it's a Hamitic language we're speaking, man. All right. It says in their countries and in their nations. So it says in their nations, and we've seen all their nations, man. So the nation of Canaan belonged to Ham before God gave it to us Israelites. The Hittites, man, the land of Turkey belonged to Hittites, black people. So right now, praise the Most High, you should have a greater perception of black history and just how much black people have contributed to ancient history, man, that they're never going to tell you about. But what the so-called Christian wants to tell you is that look at this. This is all black people are responsible for in history. Oh, everything that you've got is in Africa, and they say Africa is primitive, so you guys didn't do nothing. And then they say, oh well, Egypt was an advanced civilization, but the Egyptians are not they're not the same Africans as West Africans. Egyptians are Arabs, and they want to tell us that we never made that civilization. But what we can see is, yeah, man, Egyptians are the same race as the black Cushites, as the same race as the black Libyans, Futites. So, as the black Canaanites, like, yo, we black people are the ones, the forefathers of all of this greatness, man. And in this map here, all of these kingdoms, like you've got Turkey right here. It's got a lot of great history in Turkey, and you've got ancient Babylon. They want to give that all to Japheth. But we just saw that the Hittites were the forefathers of that land. But they only want to put Heth there in small. Look how small they put Heth. But we know that through history, this area was ruled by Heth, man. You know what I'm saying? And then even with Babylon, they want to put Akkad and Erech and all of these lands here in the yellow for Shem, like this was all a land of Shem. But who founded Babylon, man? Hamites, Cush, Nimrod. So yeah, praise the Most High. Hopefully this has opened your mind and shown you just Genesis chapter 10 alone debunks a lot of the white supremacist, Eurocentric history that we've been taught. And it gives us a Hamitic centric. It shows us that Black Hamites, man, yo, they did a lot, bro. Praise the Most High. And with that, I say stay tuned because we got another video coming where we're going to be breaking down the curse of Canaan, which racists like to call the curse of Ham, because that's going to explain a lot of doctrine right there. Because the so-called Christians, they want to say to us, oh, the reason why black people were slaves is because of the curse of Canaan, because God cursed black people, Canaanites, to be slaves. But they give a complete wrong interpretation for that. So we're going to get into that in the future. So just stay tuned for that. With that, we say, Yah bless, family. Hope this was edifying. All right. Shalom. Yeah, man. Yah bless.